Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to put together the Dancing Snowman die from Spellbinders. I recently got it and I love anything that has movement or interaction or just something 3D on it. So I thought this would be a really cute one. It's a very simple die to put together. It comes with all of the pieces, including the little gift and the tree that he's holding. I'm actually not going to put those pieces on there, but it's also a great way to use up cardstock scraps. So I'm taking these dies and I'm die cutting them with the cardstock scraps. For the actual snowman, I am using some glitter cardstock. It's nice and thick. It's going to give a nice sturdy base to the snowman or to the body. And I'm also using that same glitter stock for the white around the hat, the little ball, and then the white on the mittens. It's going to add a nice sparkle as well as the strength and stability because it's nice and thick. I did the rest of the die cutting off screen, so now it's time to put it together. I've got all of my pieces laid out, and the first thing I'm going to do is take a silver gel pen, and I'm actually going to color the black cardstock in the bottom of the skates to make them silver. Looks a tiny little bit more realistic than the black itself. You could leave it black, it would be just fine, but I thought that gel pen, it was an easy way to color it. Then I'm going to take my tweezers, and I'm using reverse grip tweezers here. That way I don't have to squeeze them to hold them. I only squeeze them to release them. And I'm going to hold all the little bits and pieces. This is going to help position things a little bit better so my fingers won't be in the way. They won't get glue all over them. It's just a really easy way to be able to put little tiny intricate pieces together because some of these are really tiny. So it just makes it a little bit easier. Once the little mittens or boots and trim are glued on, I'm going to set that aside to dry. I don't want things to be jarred out of place while I'm putting the rest of the things together. And there's a lot of little pieces to go, so it's easy enough to have it set aside to dry fully. I'm using some Distress Collage Medium to glue everything together here. I love Distress Collage Medium because it dries clear and it dries matte. So if anything happens to have a little bit too much extra glue, which is a little bit easy with some of these tiny pieces, it's not going to show. It's going to dry completely clear and matte, and you're never going to know that it's there. It's easy to add just a tiny drop of the glue and avoid that, but sometimes you get a little bit too much. These pieces are really easy to see exactly what goes where, so I like the fact that I don't have to do any guesswork as to what goes in what place for each part of the snowman. And like I said before, this is a great way to use up cardstock scraps. There's so many different little tiny bits and pieces here that it's a perfect use for getting some of those used up rather than cutting into something new. This would also be really cute in flocked paper. The trim on the mittens and the hat and the little puff ball at the end, that would be really cute with flock paper if you had it. I didn't have any, so I just did the glitter paper. It looks really cute that way as well. Now the Santa or the snowman face, all of those little eyes and the cheeks and the nose fall out. So there's a couple different options. I chose to just do cardstock scraps and glue them behind, but you could, if you wanted, keep those pieces when they are die cut and color them and paper piece them or inlay them back in there and just put some cardstock on the back so that it has something to glue to. You could also do what I did and just do those cardstock scraps, or you can cut them out twice and leave one set in there, color the second one and glue that on top. So there's a few different options on what you can do with that. It's nice to be able to have the choice of how you want to do that. It was easy enough to glue pieces to the back and then just set it aside to dry. It doesn't look pretty on the back, but you're never ever going to see this on the front of the card anyways, so I didn't mind doing it this way. These little holes are really tiny, so you really don't need a whole lot of cardstock on the back of it in order to cover those holes. You just want to make sure that it is covered and that you don't have any cardstock going outside of the snowman face. If you do have that, once it's dry, you can just use the scissors to trim that off. And then because we're waiting for the cardstock pieces on the back of the snowman face to dry, I'm just putting a little bit of glue at the top of the scarf, and I'm just going to place that snowman head right on top of that scarf so that can dry as well. Once that is completely dry, I realized that I had wanted to cut doubles of the legs and the hands in order to give them a little bit more strength and stability. Because they're so fine, I wanted to make sure that it could handle being in an envelope and being touched and played with. So I want to make sure that it has that stability. So I'm just cutting an extra set, same cardstock, and I'm just going to glue that behind. So it doesn't affect anything other than the fact that it's going to add a little bit more strength. If you have a really thick black cardstock, you wouldn't have needed to do this. Mine, while it's not the thinnest cardstock ever, it's not really, really, really thick. So I wanted to make sure that it just had that extra layer to it. I'm also going to take a moment to glue the head of the snowman to the body of the snowman. And then while those things are drying, I'm going to start working on my background. Now, there are so many different ways you could do a background for this. You could stencil something, you could use printed paper, you could use distress inks and ink a background. I chose to just get a light blue colored cardstock, and then I'm going to use the new paste from Ranger. So I'm going to use the Snowfall Gritpaste, and I'm going to create kind of a snowfall-y background with one of the stencils. And then for the bottom, I'm going to use the Sparkle texture paste, and I'm going to kind of create a sheet of ice at the bottom. Because this snowman has skates on him, I thought it would be kind of cute if it looked like he was skating. So to do the stencil, this stencil doesn't cover the whole piece of paper. So I'm going to do part of it, clean all of my supplies off, let that completely dry, and then I'm going to do the rest of the snow. If I were to do that second part of the snow now, I would be squishing that first part and possibly ruining it. Any of the paste that has gone to the side of the cardstock while it's wet, I'm just using my fingers to remove some of that excess. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I can also die cut my words. So I have this Tinsel Time Sentiments die set that I'm using for the words, and I'm just going to do Winter Cheer. This die set has 36 different dies in it, which is 18 sentiments plus their shadow. So there's a lot of choice in here, and it's nice that you get such a fine, intricate, detailed sentiment out of it. I like the font as well. This is where tweezers are really going to be helpful with placing that sentiment, that fine script on its shadow, and for holding it with the glue. And this is also where you want to make sure that you have a glue that either dries completely clear or that has a really, really fine tip to it, because this sentiment is really quite fine. So I'm just using my Distress Collage medium again, holding it with the tweezers while I put some glue on there. And I'm trying not to put too much on there. Even though it dries completely clear and completely matte, I want to make sure that I don't have large amounts of glue that are seeping out from underneath there. So I try to keep that to a minimum. And those tweezers really, really help with placing it. Once my snow is dry, I can put that second layer on. So you can see that it kind of lightens as it dries. It goes not completely transparent, but it does look like fluffy snow. It doesn't feel like it because it's got the texture paste grit to it, but it does look like fluffy flakes of snow, which is going to be a nice background for this. So I'm just putting a little bit on the right side of the card here, only where there isn't already some stenciled from before. And I'm going to let that dry as well. Before I let that dry, I'm going to tape off the bottom of that cardstock, and then I'm going to put the sparkle texture paste on there. I didn't necessarily need to tape it off completely, but I wanted to have a straight line because if you're looking at ice, it's going to have a straight line to it. And I really wasn't confident in my ability to have a nice straight line just with a palette knife and with the paste. So using a little bit of painter's tape was the answer. It made it nice and easy to get a clear straight line, and then I could remove that while the paste was still wet and make sure that it worked out perfectly. So the pastes themselves take probably about an hour to dry. This was at night, so I waited until the next morning till it was done. Once it was completely dry, we could start putting our card together. You don't want to start putting anything on top of this while it's still wet. There's a really good chance of messing it up. So now that everything is dry and all of our pieces are ready to go, we can start assembling our card. So I'm going to use that same Distress Collage medium to glue everything together on here. I am going to use some foam pop dots on the snowman, and you'll see why in a moment. You may have noticed that the arms as well as the legs have little circles in them. Those are so that you can do the interactive part. Now, I'm not doing that with the arms because I don't have a pop dot small enough to go in there to let them move freely, as well as the fact that unless you prop them up somehow, they're just going to go down. Gravity still works on cards. So I'm only going to use it for the legs. And I've got a bunch of different foam square or foam circles to choose from. I chose the middle size. I want to make sure that those legs have enough room to move freely. So I placed my legs where I wanted them to go, and then I placed that foam pop dot towards the top of that inside circle from those legs. You don't want to put it in the middle, because as soon as you put it in the middle, when you lift your card up, that circle is going to drop down so that it touches the top of the foam. So make sure that you put your foam at the top of that circle. You don't want to cover the cardstock. You still want it to be able to move freely. I did test as well, just to make sure that everything was moving before I continued on assembling the rest of the card. For the winter cheer sentiment, I did put my acrylic block on there after gluing it. Because I'm gluing it right to some of those texture paste snowflakes, I wanted to make sure that it had good contact and that it wasn't lifting up from there. Before gluing down the snowman's body, I put some foam pop dots at the top and just along the sides right by his arms to make sure that that was raised up so that those legs could swing freely. And I love how he turned out. He's so cute. This is just an adorable card to make just for something fun and to send to someone that would love something that's a little bit interactive, a little bit unique. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you being here.